What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So in the last 2 days, two pretty decent teams were eliminated from the Stanley Cup playoffs. I am not talking about the Capitals and the Islanders. I already made a full video on the Islanders and the Capitals' future. It's pretty obvious that they're heading towards a pretty heavy retool or rebuild. But I wanted to talk about the Lightning, who lost in 5 games to the Florida Panthers, and the Winnipeg Jets, who lost in 5 games to the Colorado Avalanche. Both of these teams, one was definitely more heartbreaking than the other in the Winnipeg Jets after winning game 1, after buying so heavy at the deadline. Versus the Lightning, the writing was kind of on the wall. First round loss last year, didn't do much at the deadline. Florida was the far better team, but both are pretty underwhelming, and both, in my opinion, have pretty big off seasons coming up. So we are going to be looking at each team based on what their cap structure is, their contract structure, assets, what they can do to potentially be competitive, or in the Lightning's case, if they are going to blow it up, what the hell would that look like? I think the Winnipeg Jets, we can all agree, are going to remain competitive. So we're going to dive into that right now. I'm going to tell you what the key decisions that they have to make, what I personally would do. And for the Winnipeg Jets, I'm going to actually make like a mock roster of what my ideal offseason maybe would look like. So let's get into it. First up, we're going to do the Winnipeg Jets just because it was shocking in the way that they lost. They got absolutely dominated in those 4 games. Hellebuck didn't play good, but I think it was more the defense core, and that's what they need to change this offseason. The forward core, for the most part, is locked up. I'm not sure if you can re-sign Toffoli or Monahan, but you still have a solid forward core. I still think that they do have a good forward core, although they maybe didn't show up in those final 4 games to the degree that you would like. They have an okay forward core, but it's that defense core that is not looking good. Let's look at the Winnipeg Jets and their cap situation. This comes to us from Cap Friendly. There's a lot of movement potentially in that defense core. They got, I believe, 12 forwards under contract next year once you bring up Brad Lambert. But that defense core, man, Brendan Dillon, DeMello, Miller, Sandberg has 1 year left, Schmidt and Pionk. That's what I want to look at right now. I think you got to get rid of one of them. Almost making $6 million. In the case of Pionk, he does play some big minutes, but he's just not a good player in those minutes. And Nate Schmidt this season was playing like $16.50 a night. I think you got to move off them. And when looking at what that would potentially cost, might cost that second round pick from the Montreal Canadiens that is 37th overall, or maybe just your 2026 7th. I think you do have to move off them. You got to open up that money for an actual effective either top pair or second pair defenseman. Now, when looking at the Jets in this offseason, they're going to have $13.3 million. Once you get rid of either Pionk or Schmidt, what am I thinking about? Pionk or Schmidt, that's going to be over $19 million to spend. So what does that look like? I think you definitely need to bring in a top 4 defenseman. I would be in favor of re-signing Dylan DeMello. He has been playing all season with Josh Morrissey. They were a pretty effective pair. They played over 1,200 minutes this season at even strength, 52.5% expected goals percentage. I think that he probably is a second pair guy. He just has so much chemistry with Josh Morrissey. I would keep him, and he can be your top pair guy as long as you have a pretty decent second pair. If you upgrade that second pair, I would go after Pesce, Tanev, Sean Walker. All 3 of those guys would be heavily involved. I think they would upgrade overall. Pesce's more of an offensive defenseman, but the other 2 from a defensive standpoint versus what you were running out before would be fantastic to land that. You saw in this series just too many defensive laps from their defense core. You need to upgrade this defense core if you're going to be serious, because again, this forward core is solid. Maybe they didn't show up to the level that you expected, but with Hellebuck and you get some more defensive defensemen, this team could potentially be competitive. And here's what my dream scenario. I understand they're not going to get all these guys, but this would be my dream scenario within cap limits. This is what it would be. It would look like with the defense core: Morrissey, DeMello, Sean Walker, Chris Tanev, Sandberg, and then Pionk or Nate Schmidt. They signed Hanola as well. I think this defense core would definitely be a massive upgrade than what they have right now. This is cap compliant. You'd be relying on guys like Brad Lambert to really step up at the NHL level. Your bottom 6 is still pretty good. It's still a pretty solid bottom 6, especially if they actually play Cole Perfetti. I don't love Adam Lowry as a second line center, but he can play a solid 2-way second line center. So this is the team. They just bring up the goaltender. I'm not sure that they're going to be able to re-sign Laurent Brossoit. I think that team, from a defensive standpoint, would be far more intimidating than what they have right now, than their slow, methodical, bad placement, bad positioning that they had in this series. they need to do something with the defense core. That's really what it comes down to. You're not going to see Kyle Connor get traded. You're not going to see any massive pieces. I don't think Cole Perfetti's even going to get traded. And in this scenario, I have him signing a pretty cheap $2.75 million extension for 2 years. Chris Tanev's deal, 4.5, would be like four years if you want to get him that cheap. Sean Walker as well, a little bit younger, so I gave him 5 years, $5 million. But that's my dream offseason for the Winnipeg Jets. Would they still beat Colorado with that lineup? Probably not, but it probably goes 6, probably goes 7, and they look far better defensively. If you're Winnipeg, you're just in this really tough spot because you probably should have blown it up last offseason or even the offseason before that. But you're Winnipeg. If you go through a rebuild, if you go through a heavy retool, your team might not be there by the time that retool or rebuild is over. So I understand that the people are going to scream that they should blow it up. It's not logical. They're locked in, especially with these Scheifele and Hellebuck contracts kicking in. So that's what my dream offseason looks like for the Winnipeg Jets. Not a historic big market for free agency, so I don't expect them to land both Tanev and Walker. But I think you definitely need to move out one of their bad defenseman contracts, expiring contracts too, so it is movable. You can't be paying Nate Schmidt and Neil Pionk almost a combined $12 million next season. That is a recipe for a disaster. Next up, though, Tampa Bay Lightning. Pretty straightforward what this offseason is going to entail for them when looking at it. Steven Stamkos, unrestricted free agent. Not much beyond that. Duclair, maybe they can bring back, but probably only if they don't re-sign Steven Stamkos. Mott, Austin, Chafee, Dumba's not re-signing, and those other 3 forwards I just mentioned are league minimum players. Calvin DeHaan, I would definitely try to re-sign. That's another guy that if I was Winnipeg, maybe I would go after for a bottom pair. And Hayden Fleury. So when looking at their cap, $12.5 million this summer. So it's a decision to make. It appears like they are trending more towards signing Steven Stamkos, but he's going to take up, $7-ish million, maybe $500,000 more than that, 7.5, maybe $500,000 less than that. So you're going to have $5 million remaining to not really improve this team that much when looking at the salary cap standpoint. If you decide to not re-sign Steven Stamkos, would you rather have Steven Stamkos at $7 million or 2 $3.75 million players or 3, what's that math on that? $2.4 million players roughly. So it's really going to come down to, do they value Steven Stamkos enough versus depth? Because this year we clearly saw the effects, especially once Sergachev went down, how shallow this team is. It is a very, very shallow team when looking at it, especially after a Tanner Jeannot kind of trade doesn't work. It's up to Brisebois if he values the Steven Stamkos, the goal scoring that he provides on the power play, but he is more of a power play merchant at this point. I personally would move off Steven Stamkos. I know that might be controversial, but I feel like you need depth. If that the past 2 years have proven anything, it's that you won when you had that fantastic third line of Barclay Goudreau, Blake Coleman, and then Yanni Gord. I don't know why I just blanked on their names, but you won when you had that depth. That you had the superstar talent, but you also had the depth. And the depth's never going to be the same considering you've traded every goddamn asset. But I'd rather have the young players than Steven Stamkos, especially considering Stamkos has been getting worse, at least analytically. I know the numbers were very impressive, but even 2 years ago, he had 106 points. I personally, if you care about winning, I would move off Steven Stamkos. I know that might be crazy to say, but I personally would move off him. You're too top heavy right now. Toronto gets criticized for having all their core 4, core 5, making all this money. It's even worse in Tampa Bay right now. You got a 9.5, 9.5, which those are good deals, don't get me wrong, but 9.5, 9.5. What's Hedman? Edmonds at 8, Sergachev 8.5, Vasilevsky 9.5. Right now, it's not a winning formula. Right now, you do not have the depth. So if I were to sign Steven Stamkos, this might be crazy, but I would give him like a 5 or 6 year deal. I would say, fuck it. We're going to get a low AAV. We're going to pay you $6 million, but it's going to be a 5 or 6 year deal. Then maybe I would understand it. Then it's worth it. Similarly to what the Penguins did with Evgeny Malkin, a 4-year, $6 million deal. Letang was 6 years, 6.1. I know those didn't work out, but Tampa has a much younger core than Pittsburgh Penguins. But if you're going to re-sign Steven Stamkos, I don't like the idea of a 2 to 3 year deal at 7, maybe even 7.5, maybe even $7.75 million. If you're going to buy in and if you think that this team is going to be competitive for the next 2 to 3 years, because again, they're going to be rebuilding regardless in 3 to 4 years once Kucherov's 35, Vasilevsky's 30. Like, they have a finite window. So why not just give Steven Stamkos this ludicrous deal of a 5 to 6 year deal at a very low cap hit? So the next year or two, you get a lot of surplus value from Steven Stamkos. So If you're going to re-sign Steven Stamkos, make it a goofy-ass deal. He's going to retire. You can just throw him on LTIR. He retires after year 4 of that deal, and he's 38 years old. He has his Stanley Cups. LTIR, retire him, and just rebuild, tank it up after that. So if you're going to sign Steven Stamkos, make it goofy as hell. That's my thoughts on these two teams. Winnipeg, trade one of your bad defensemen that are making almost $6 million in order to free up some money to go out and get some actual solid top 4 defensemen. And if you're the Tampa Bay Lightning, either let Steven Stamkos walk or give him a 5 to 6 year contract. Let me know in the comments. What do you think? Both of these teams, it'd be a miracle, in my opinion, if they go on deep runs next year. But there are some fixes that they can definitely be more complete, more competitive teams. I expect both to be in the playoffs next year. But let me know in the comments. What do you think?